But today, I'm the greatest of all time. Thank you.
Never stop, I'll get it if I want it. Gotta make to myself a promise. I won't quit, keep going till I got it. I won't give up till I'm on top.
Yo, no, I ain't the type to give up. If I do something, man, I do it till I get what I want. I turn a business out of nothing into something I love. I got a poker face, but honestly, I'm not one to bluff. I flip a switch, never miss, man, I always stay up. Don't let them see you, always have a plan to stay tough. This life ahead of you ain't easy, it was built to be rough. But that's what makes a personality, is tragedy, bruh. So keep your head on your shoulders. Now we ain't out here moving rocks, we out here moving boulders. Now we ain't getting posterized, we out here making posters. And we ain't got nothing to hide, we move forward like soldiers. You better wake up for the pay stub, or you'll pay up. Don't make love to the game, bruh, fuck the game up. Change up, rearrange stuff to your greatness. Same us for the way up, play the game, bruh.
Never stop, I'll get it if I want it. Gotta make to myself a promise. I won't quit, keep going till I got it. I won't give up till I'm on top, yeah.
You know I'm always honest, there ain't no way I'll ever stop it.
I won't quit, keep going till I got it. I won't give up till I'm on top,
I'm always flirting with pain, she like to hurt me and maim. I'm always working to change, but she's still lurking the same. I keep on building a dynasty while the haters be trying me, but they hate from inside.
Good afternoon and welcome to the eve of Week 18 of the NFL season, also known as the regular season finale, and basically the playoff push, as we have a handful of teams still battling for playoff positioning. That is actually what our show is about today. Joined by Jay McLovin. Jay, thanks for hopping on this afternoon, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's good to be here. Good to talk some footballs. I'm going to throw a quick shameless plug out there. Hey, you guys, don't forget to tune in to our show on the 9th, Monday the 9th, and that will be at, I believe, 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll have Philly Sports Guy. Dustin, I know you'll be there, I believe. No, will you be there, Dustin? Or is that you will?
I'm going to try to, yes.
Okay. But yeah, we're gonna have Philly Sports Guy on this show, and this ties right into what me and Dustin are getting ready to talk about, which is the playoffs. And so it's gonna be good to have a Philly guy here, have a Dallas guy here, and then I would say Logan, but let's be honest, Atlanta ain't going nowhere. Neither's the Vikings.
Hey, the Vikings will have a 3% chance. They're not done yet.
Yeah, the 9th is Tuesday, Frankie. So yeah, it's the 9th. That he'll be on the Tuesday show of ESPN at 3 p.m. Eastern. That should be 2 p.m. Central.
So yeah, before we get into really the different scenarios, I think the best thing to do, or the easiest thing to do at this point, is to basically just kind of eliminate the teams we don't need to talk about. There are some teams that have not only clinched, but there are teams that know for sure what seed they're going to be at, so their games really don't matter this weekend. And obviously, if you look at the AFC, the Baltimore Ravens, with their win over the Miami Dolphins last week, clinched home field in the AFC. They've got everything locked up. We've already heard John Harbaugh say that Lamar Jackson's not playing, Gus Edwards isn't playing, I believe Odell Beckham is sitting, so they're pretty much going with Tyler Huntley at quarterback and using what most would call a preseason roster this week against the Steelers, just because they have nothing to play for. You can say the same thing for the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC with their win last week in Philadelphia, losing to Arizona. San Francisco has the number 1 seed in the NFC locked up, so they'll probably be in a similar position to where they have nothing to play for on their end. But the rest of the NFC is very wide open, which we'll get to them second, because the AFC, I think, is more clear-cut. You have Kansas City. They clinched the AFC West for an 8th consecutive season. Their seed is set in stone. They cannot get any higher than a 3 seed. They cannot get any lower than a 3 seed. So knowing that they are the 3 seed, Patrick Mahomes and all these typical starters for Kansas City are getting the week off, with the exception of Travis Kelce, because he only needs, I think, 29 yards to hit the 1,000-yard mark again. So they're going to start him until he gets to that 1,000-yard mark, and then they're going to sit him. And then you have the Cleveland Browns, who also clinched a playoff spot and are locked into the number 5 seed. So same thing applies for them this weekend. They probably won't start many of their starters because they have their seed clinched. But outside of that, the AFC is kind of an interesting predicament, and the big game of the weekend that's going to really determine the AFC playoff picture is that Miami Dolphins versus Buffalo Bills matchup on Sunday night. And when you look at these two teams, you had Buffalo, who was sitting at 6-6 4 weeks ago. They were sitting at the 11th seed in the AFC, and a lot of people were wondering if Buffalo was even going to make the playoffs at that point. And then you have a Miami Dolphins team who at one point was running away with the AFC East. And now they've been hitting with the injury bug. Mostert's missed a couple of games. Tyreek Hill missed a game. Waddle's missed time. And now Bradley Chubb is going to miss not only the rest of the regular season, but all of the playoffs with the torn ACL. And now the Dolphins are forced to be in a must-win game this weekend to win the AFC East. They at least have the benefit of losing. They're still going to make the playoffs, win or lose. So if they win, they keep that number 2 seed. If they lose, they go to the 6th seed versus Buffalo. They win, they get the 2 seed, but if they lose, they could potentially miss the playoffs altogether. And because of that, and because of the way Buffalo's playing at this point, I do think Buffalo wins. And I think Buffalo will kind of lock in that number 2 seed and kind of move Miami down to the number 6 seed. But it wouldn't shock me either way if Miami won, but I think Buffalo's going to get that 2 seed with Miami going down to the 6.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick to Frankie, I forgot. Yep, he is a Raiders fan, and that even makes it worse because clearly they're not going anywhere. Yeah, the AFC, Dustin, is the biggest game there. Clearly the biggest game is that Miami and Buffalo game. I don't see Miami win that by any stretch of the mad, and that's only because of injuries. They have taken in so many critical injuries. I just don't see how they could possibly win that game. When you got your best quarterback in Howard, you got Bradley Chubb, quite obviously your best defender, and then you get the likes of Waddle, who's obviously injury prone right now. You got Tyreek Hill, who was in a boot not that long ago, plus his house fire, plus, it just seems like plus, and everything is a plus over there. Mostert's a plus. Everybody's a plus. So I just don't know how you had that much issues and think you're going to come out here against a pretty well-charged Buffalo team who has gone through some wars in the last couple of days and think you're going to possibly get that win. I just don't see that happen. I think it's unrealistic to think that that's going to happen. I think Miami is going to stay in the playoffs. I think they're going to take that loss. I think they're going to move down to, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Dustin, I think they slide down to 6.
Yeah,
maybe 7.
6. Yeah, 2 to 6 they would go. They can't get any lower than a 6.
Okay, so I think they probably slide down to that 6th spot. It would be nice for them to stay in that 2 spot because nobody wants to go up against Baltimore. Let's be honest. Nobody wants to go against Baltimore. And I think that would behoove them well to stay in that 2 spot, but I just don't think that's realistic. And I think Miami at some point is going to have to face Baltimore in this playoffs. And, of course, I think that will be their playoff exit at that level. But, yeah, this Buffalo game, if Buffalo doesn't win, they're out.
They're not necessarily out. They have
close to being out, correct?
They
have to take some other things to get them in, correct?
Yeah, if they lose, they can still get in, but other things have to go right, which we'll get into in a second here. But
yeah, I do think also, though, Dustin, I think the second biggest game for me, and I don't know how you feel about it, is that Texans and Colts game.
Yep, that's the one we're going to talk about next.
Okay, good deal.
Yeah, the thing with Miami was when you look at how they were playing the first 8 or 9 weeks of the season, I think a lot of people had them as the representative to come out of the AFC. And when you looked at what their offense was doing and kind of how their defense was playing, you could see why people started to say that. But then obviously, like you said, the injuries have been the biggest reason for Miami's kind of late season slide here. But you can't use injuries as an excuse because every team goes through injuries. It's more so a matter of how you can adjust to the players you're losing. And Miami, to me, is still talented enough to make it to the Super Bowl just because they have one of the best, if not the best, offenses in the AFC. But the only way they get there is for them to have home field or at least to have 2 home games because playing in Miami has always been an X factor for them because teams aren't used to the warm weather this type of year. You see it even when teams like Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, or Miami were bottom feeders in the league. They would still always end up with 4 or 5 wins at home because teams weren't used to going into Florida to play in that kind of heat and humidity, and that was always the advantage Miami had, and that was one of the reasons why I felt Miami could make a deep playoff run because a lot of people had them as one of those top 2 teams where if they can get 2 home games, essentially they can get to the AFC title game and anything can happen at that point. But if they fall to the 6th seed, they're going to Kansas City that first playoff game, which it's going to be hard enough for Miami to go into Kansas City and win healthy, let alone not healthy and do it. And then right after that, they'd be going to Baltimore. And then chances are they'd be going back to Buffalo in AFC Championship game. So Miami has a lot, even both teams have a lot at stake to play for. And obviously Buffalo has more to lose because they can miss the playoffs altogether. But if Miami wants to kind of view this season as a success, I think Miami has to win this game because otherwise they're going to be looked at as having one of those teams that kind of choked away a shot at possibly a Super Bowl.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, man, Miami really does have a lot, riding out there. I just feel like, Dustin, when you're missing 4 to 5 of your, top playmakers that make that team go, it's really, really hard.
Exactly. And then the next game,
really hard.
Yeah, the next game that you mentioned is the one that we're going to talk about, and it's that Houston Texans Indianapolis Colts game where both teams right now are sitting at 9-7. Well, the Colts are 9-7. They are sitting at the 7th seed, which is the final playoff spot, versus the Texans are sitting at 9-7 and are on the outside looking in at that number 8 position. Winner of this game obviously overtakes that final playoff spot and basically is the team that's going to face Miami or Buffalo once the playoffs start. And when the season started, if you would have told me that both the Indianapolis Colts and the Houston Texans would have been in this position, I would have called you crazy. Because you look at how bad both of these teams were last season.
Yeah.
Both of them drafted rookie quarterbacks in Anthony Richardson and C.J. Stroud. And C.J. Stroud's played like an MVP candidate most of the season. He, by all means, is going to probably be the unanimous Rookie of the Year choice. Versus Anthony Richardson, he only played 4 games this year. And he showed promise, but he wasn't anything special because that was always the biggest concern with him coming out of college was a lot of people felt he wasn't a polished passer yet. And you saw that early on, but it's been Gardner Minshew who's come in and has really stabilized that Colts team, has kept them in survive mode where they're in the position that they're in. I don't know. I think the Colts might have a better roster in terms of who they have there. But there's something about this Texans team. There's something about the way DeMeco Ryans has this team believing in themselves and just the way that C.J. Stroud has played that makes me feel that Houston is going to finish 10-7. They are going to beat the Colts, and they're going to get into the playoffs as that final seed. And that's a very dangerous 7 seed any way you look at it.
Yeah, it is for a lot of reasons, like you just said. I think with Houston, it starts out with you bring in DeMeco Ryans. That was positive move number 1. Positive move number 2 is they draft C.J. Stroud. Positive step number 3 was the emergence of Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and company, and stuff. So, and then of course on the defensive side, they've really stepped up, and I think that's a lot that has to do with DeMeco Ryans' philosophy that's been put into that defense through obviously the coordinator as well. So there's a lot of positive things that's gone on over there in Houston, and it all started with DeMeco Ryans and then carried forth through the MVP type performance, more than just Rookie of the Year. We're almost talking NFL. He has been in NFL MVP conversations up until the point where he got hurt, and then he kind of fell out of the conversation a little bit. But, this is a guy who's a rookie, and we're talking NFL MVP at one point. I don't see how this team has nowhere to go but up at this point because they have put all the right places. And what I mean by up, I mean above and beyond just finishing well or having a winning record. I mean up and beyond from that and the playoffs. I think this team has an opportunity if they can stay healthy or get some healthiness back into them and get that momentum. Because again, you don't have to be the best team in the league. You just got to be the hottest team in the league. And if this Houston Texans goes into the playoffs hot, there's no reason why they can't at the very least, get to the AFC Championship game. That's not to say that the Colts aren't playing good as well, but I'm not a big fan of Gardner Minshew. I never have been a fan of Gardner Minshew. I think he's a gap-filled quarterback. It doesn't mean that this Colts team can't still do big things, though, because they do have good, decent wide receivers and Michael Pittman Jr. They have good running back in Jonathan Taylor. And they have a decent, not a great, but they have a decent O-line. but I don't expect the Colts to go far. I don't expect the Colts to go far. I think the Texans had the best shot out of the two of them to get to the AFC Championship.
And then that kind of leaves that final seed up for grabs, which is that number 4 seed, which is currently occupied by the Jaguars. But then you have the whole situation with Houston and Indianapolis where the winner of that game will obviously overtake the final seed in the playoffs. But it could go even a bit further than that, because if Jacksonville loses to Tennessee, then the winner of that Houston-Indianapolis game wins the AFC South, goes into the number 4 spot, which kind of leaves that final playoff spot up in the air for Pittsburgh and for Jacksonville to battle it out for that number 7 seed. Jacksonville's very fortunate to get the matchup they get this weekend, because they are facing a Tennessee Titans team who's really struggled this year. They're a shell of what they were the first 4 or 5 years that Mike Vrabel was there. Obviously, Ryan Tannehill is going to be gone next year, so it's going to be the Will Levis show going forward. Derrick Henry's starting to be questioned if he's going to return or if he's going to be used as trade bait. So the Titans are kind of on the verge of going into their rebuild or at least retool mode to get back to where they once were. And Jacksonville's really struggled their last 4 games. They're 1-3 in their last 4 games, but not having Trevor Lawrence the last couple of weeks due to ankle injuries has not helped Jacksonville's case at all. But he is expected to play on Sunday. Yep, Sunday. He is expected to play on Sunday, which I think he's playing because it is a must-win situation. Versus if Jacksonville already had everything locked up, I could have saw them sitting Trevor Lawrence 1 more week just to make sure he's ready to go for the playoffs. With Lawrence coming back, with this being a must-win game, I do think Jacksonville wins to kind of clinch the AFC South and get that number 4 seed. But I'm not going to be shocked to see Tennessee beat Jacksonville to kind of open that door for either Houston or Indianapolis to get that number 4 seed, and then potentially have Jacksonville fall out of the playoffs completely with Pittsburgh sneaking in at number 7.
Right, because correct me if I'm wrong. So Jacksonville wins, obviously they'll stay at the 4 seed. Yep. If Houston wins, they'll stay at the 7 seed, and then that would actually force Indianapolis out of the playoffs, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, absolutely. So, and I would be shocked. I would be absolutely shocked if Jacksonville lost to the Tennessee Titans. Honestly, I really would. Especially, I love that Mike Vrabel press conference after Tennessee's last loss, where he said we talked about sucking and hating to lose, and asking the reporter if he had any other thoughts that he wanted to share. I mean, it was just a crazy press conference all the way around over there. So I think the Tennessee team is in a disarray. Lawrence is back at the helm. Jacksonville is an incredibly tough team. It can be good on defense when they want to be. And now I think it's a snowball's chance in hell that they lose to the Tennessee Titans. And I think really the only true question mark is, can Houston or the Colts snag that number 7 spot? And let's not forget Pittsburgh's also in the mix.
Yeah, Pittsburgh win or lose.
Yeah.
I think the only way Pittsburgh gets in is if Jacksonville loses.
Exactly. And that was kind of my thought, you know. And if that's the case, man, and look, let's be honest, Pittsburgh has not an easy route, but they don't have a hard route either, because Baltimore is pretty much resting all of their main guys.
Yeah, and the thing with Pittsburgh too, which not a lot of people realize, is Pittsburgh's 4-1 inside that AFC North, which is actually a better record than the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, and that Mason Rudolph to Pickens connection that's been formed really has strengthened that Pittsburgh team across the board. So, you know, they have a pretty good running back core in T.J. Warren and Najee Harris. You know, they seem to be able to move the ball with that duo. And then, of course, like I said, when you got Johnson and you have Pickens and company over there, this team can be good. And they don't have a bad defense. They have a pretty decent defense with T.J. Watt and company. So, now, although Minkah Fitzpatrick is out, which would have been certainly a good help for them, I do think that they have everything it takes to beat Baltimore. Like you said, it comes down to, will Jacksonville lose to Tennessee? I don't see that happening. And for that reason, I just think ultimately Pittsburgh will get eliminated.
And this is kind of why I've been one of the people that have said the playoffs just need to go to 8 teams on each side and just basically eliminate that first round bye. Just because 8 to me is the number, because you look at the NHL has 8, The NBA has 8. Major League Baseball has 6 now, but they're trying to get to 8. I think the NFL should just go to 8 and just kind of do away with the whole first round bye type of thing anyways, because you hear it every year. The teams that get that first round bye, 95% of those teams hate it because you're essentially getting that week off. But if you have that number 1 seed locked up, those players are almost going 21 days before they actually play again, because a lot of them don't play in week 18 then, just because there's no reason to play them. You get rid of that. You get rid of that first round bye. You don't have to play your starters that entire week 18. Give them like the first quarter, give them the first half just to give them some reps, and then bring in your backups, and everyone then can kind of stay on that normal routine, because having players miss 20 days before they see game action and going right into a playoff game, that's not easy on anybody. And that's why you see a lot of these number 1 seeds now don't make it to the Super Bowl, just because they're rusty come that first playoff game.
And that's one of the things too that I never understood. I don't, unless your team is just struggling with injuries. Let's say, for example, let's just take the Dolphins. They're the prima donna for that. Unless you're a team like the Dolphins, I would not rest my players, because of the fact that I don't know if I want them having 21 days off, not having that game time conditioning, not having that momentum building experiences. I don't know if I want them having that much time off. To me, like you said, I think it's more of a detriment than it is a help. Unless my team is just dealing with injuries, I don't think I would, number 1, A, want the bye, or B, rest my players going into the playoffs. I think that's just a bad move. I think the team that's the hottest is the one that's going to stay the hottest. And if you're coming in cold after, like you said, 21 days of rest, or if you're coming in cold off of injuries, that's just not going to work well in your favor. So honestly, I wouldn't want the bye if I was a team. Absolutely not. The only reason the bye would be good is if I was dealing with injuries and I had a good enough spot. Then, I'd want the bye to rest up my guys. But if I'm not dealing with injuries, I don't want the damn bye.
Exactly. So before we go to the NFC, the way I have the AFC shaping out, it's going to be Baltimore at number 1, Buffalo at 2, Kansas City 3, Jacksonville 4, Cleveland 5, Miami 6, and Houston 7 is how I would have the field.
I got the same. I don't have anything. That's exactly what I have.
The NFC, on the other hand, is the most complicated and most exciting playoff picture that I've seen in a while, because the only team that has their seed locked in at this point is the San Francisco 49ers, who have clinched the number 1 seed. Mm-hmm. The other 6 teams that are technically above the cut line right now can move up or down in seedings based on how things play out. There's 2 teams in there that can be eliminated from the playoff picture altogether. And then there's 4 teams on the outside looking in that can find their way into the playoffs based on how this week goes. So that just goes to show you where things can turn after this week. And we're going to look right at the number 2 and the number 5 seed, which is the Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Cowboys. Both come into this game at 11-5. Both of them are tied for first in the NFC East, but the Cowboys technically hold that tiebreaker over the Eagles by beating them the second time, so they're winning the division, which pushes the Eagles to that number 5 seed. Both of them have divisional matchups that they should win this weekend, with the Cowboys facing Washington, the Eagles facing the Giants, and both of them have to play every single one of their starters because of the situation, because whoever wins this game, if Dallas wins, the division is theirs. If Philly wins and Dallas loses, Dallas goes from number 2 seed to the number 5 seed. Eagles go to like 2 or 3, whatever the scenarios are. There's so many of them. But I do think the seeding stays the same, just because I don't see Dallas losing to Washington at this point, because Washington is a dumpster fire right now. They've lost 7 in a row. They look absolutely terrible, and they're not going anywhere versus the Giants. Say what you want about the Giants' record. The Giants are giving some of these teams some pretty good battles. And we've seen it the last couple of years that the Eagles and Giants games are very competitive, and the Giants match up very well against the Eagles. So it wouldn't shock me to see the Giants beat them on Sunday. But I think both teams do win on Sunday, but I think they stay the same. So that would mean Dallas going to get the number 2 seed and Eagles staying at 5.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, right? So you got Philly coming off a loss to Arizona, which for them should have been a win, an easy win game for them guys. But just like Dallas, they fell prey to the Arizona Cardinals. And then you got to roll into the Giants. And look, you know what? Even though on paper and in reality, it looks like this team should absolutely mollywop the Giants and take that 12th win. Sometimes that team can just sneak up and bite you into you know what.
Yep.
And I would not be surprised for 1 minute if the Giants just got their gumption up enough to give the Philadelphia Eagles another run for their money. I wouldn't be surprised. However, in a comma, my money is still on the Eagles to win that game, to win their spot. I think my money is definitely on Dallas to win their spot. I don't see any of those guys at all changing their position. And I see Detroit staying where they are. They've won their division. I don't know if they've locked up that number 3 spot, but I can't imagine them not locking up that number.
Well,
3.
they have the number 3 spot locked up. But if Dallas loses, Detroit gets the number 2 seed with a win because they have the tiebreaker over Philly for that number 2 spot. So
right, and they do have the win over us, even though their record's better than us.
No,
I can see them moving up to that number 2 spot.
You and Detroit have the same record at 11-5.
Right.
So if you would lose, they would have the better record, but they would still have that same record as Philly. But based on how the tiebreakers would go into the equation, I don't know how far down they go. But if Detroit wins and Dallas loses, then Detroit goes from 3 to 2 and Philly goes to 3. So Detroit does.
I would imagine probably then that Dallas would probably take that number 6 spot.
No, they'd be the 5 seed then. So yeah,
if Philly wins, though, Philly would move up. Oh yeah, okay, I got you. So yeah, you're right. I got you. So yeah, they would take the number 5 spot.
Detroit has just as much to play for as Philly and Dallas does, and the way that the NFL does Week 18, they try to pair certain teams against each other so you can't see how they do. So this would be
God forbid you got the Vikings going against Detroit this week.
Well, what they could have did, and what I think they should have did, is they should have had Dallas and Philly playing in that 12 o'clock window.
Yeah,
because then by the time that 3 o'clock window starts, you could have had Detroit and Minnesota play. Where if Dallas lost, Detroit would have been like, okay, we can't move up past this number 3 seed. So Jared Goff, you're going to sit. Gibbs, you're going to sit. Montgomery, you're going to sit. Or if Dallas were to lose to Philly, Detroit goes into that 3 o'clock window saying, if we win, we get the 2 seed. It changes kind of the whole dynamic of the game and makes things more competitive. But even at that, Dan Campbell is not the type of coach that's going to sit players just to sit them. He doesn't care if they have the number 1 seed clinched. He doesn't care if they have a playoff spot clinched at this point, which they do. He's going to go out there and he's going to try to kick your ass every single time you're out.
Absolutely.
And I think
it's no different than what I said earlier.
Yeah.
No team wants to go into the playoffs on a loss.
Yep. And I think that's kind of where
you don't want that. Dan Campbell knows damn good well he don't have the number 1 spot, so the best thing he can do is keep all his guys on the field, especially if you don't have injuries. Like I said earlier, keep that momentum going, keep that chemistry going, keep that synchronization going. Don't get rusty, don't get complacent, and stay hot. And if you can stay hot, then you got a better shot at getting the NFC, possibly the Super Bowl, if you can stay hot and stay in sync with each other, rather than resting or whatever.
And it's not only that, the Lions are still upset with how last week's game against Dallas ended. So you know damn well they're going to come out on Sunday with a freaking chip on their shoulder, and it could get ugly early for Minnesota. I mean, yes, I want the Vikings to win because if the Vikings win, they can still get into the playoffs as the number 7 seed, which I don't think is going to happen. But, I mean, Detroit's going to play so angry on Sunday that you might see a Detroit team that we haven't seen yet this season. And I'm wondering if they play the way they're capable of on Sunday, if that just jump starts them into the playoffs for what could be a very lengthy playoff run, as this team has not won a playoff game since 1992.
I mean, there's a lot going on with that Detroit team. So we'll have to wait and see. I do think that when Detroit's playing their best ball and Dallas plays their best ball, that it is a very even matchup, and it just really is at that point. Who wants it the most is who's going to come out with the win. So, and I think the other teams are kind of getting like that too. I know Philly's going to definitely want to. Philly needs they need to get a win to get back into that playoff groove. Philly's going through a lot of issues. Philly is actually one of those teams that really concerns me. They got all the talent in the world, but their locker room in some cases can be in a disarray. Mm-hmm. And I think there's still some issues going on with Jalen Hurts and if he can be the leader of this team.
Then you look at the rest of the NFC playoff picture. The Los Angeles Rams clinched a playoff spot last week. They are either locked into the number 6 or number 7 seed. So I don't know what Sean McVay's plan is at this point. I don't know, because yes, he wants to get that number 6 seed to play Detroit as opposed to getting the 7 seed and playing Dallas. But with him already having that playoff spot clinched and knowing how old Matthew Stafford is and some of the injuries that Cooper Kupp had to deal with early in the season, you got to wonder if he just says, we're in the playoffs, we'll just take the seed we get and kind of go from there. So I could see him sitting most of his starters on Sunday just to keep them fresh. But then the rest of the NFC is wide open at this point. Packers hold the number 7 seed right now. If they beat the Bears on Sunday and the Rams lose, the Packers move up to the 6 seed and the Rams go down to the 7 seed. If the Packers win and the Rams win, the Packers stay at the 7 seed. If the Packers lose, they can still make the playoffs and stay at the 7 seed based off of what everybody else behind them does. But if they lose and a couple other teams win, they can miss the playoffs altogether as well. And that's kind of the game I want to focus on now before we get over to the NFC South, just because the Bears have very quietly been playing very good football the last month. And technically, they have been eliminated from the playoffs. They were eliminated last week. Even if they win this week, the Bears will be 8-9. They would have the same record as the Packers at 8-9. But due to other tiebreakers, the Bears cannot make the playoffs win or loss, which kind of sucks for them, just because it's a similar situation to the Lions last year, where the Packers came into week 18 needing a win to get into the playoffs, and the Lions beat them at Lambeau. And I think the same situation happens this year. I think the Bears go into Lambeau Field and knock the Packers off this week and to basically send their offseason into a frenzy, because if the Bears can go and beat Green Bay this weekend, you're going to have even more debate about whether or not Justin Fields should be back next year heading into next season. And that's going to make the number 7 seed in the playoffs all that much more interesting. So I think the Rams stay at 6. But I think the Packers are in trouble this week, and I think the Packers are in danger of losing that number 7 seed, because I see them losing to Chicago this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about this earlier today. I could definitely see Chicago coming in there and playing spoiler to Green Bay for a lot of reasons. The first reason being the fact that they're eliminated and they want to take out a playoff team. The second reason being that they're in the same damn division, and I think the Bears are looking to make a statement against this Packers going for next season. So there's a lot of chips on the shoulder, I think, out there in Chicagoland. I think Sweat could do some damage. I think Jordan Love could get pressured. And I just think that even if God forbid, if the Packers were able to hold on and clinch a 7th spot, look, this Packers team is not going to last long. They're going to be a one and done and keep on rolling type of team. So I would love to see, more than anything, Green Bay get spoiled by the Bears, and either New Orleans or Seattle slide up. And I think both of those, New Orleans and Seattle, are both playing games that are easily winnable. New Orleans is going against Atlanta. Okay, hello, that's a win. And if it's not a win, then New Orleans definitely shouldn't have been in the playoffs.
Well,
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Seattle's playing the 49ers, and the 49ers are resting a lot of their guys. I think Seattle could absolutely win that game, depending on if they go in there with a chip on their shoulders.
Yeah, that's the New Orleans-Atlanta game has a lot of intrigue to it, because the winner of that game still has a shot to make the playoffs at 8-9, because they have a shot to win their division at 8-9.
Oh, absolutely.
So that Atlanta-New Orleans game has a lot of intrigue, but the problem is Tampa Bay is playing Carolina. And I don't see Tampa Bay losing to Carolina, so I think Tampa Bay ends up clinching the NFC South at 9-8, which kind of makes that New Orleans-Atlanta game a little bit more irrelevant, just because of what you just said. If San Francisco rests most of their players, which I expect them to do, that opens the door for Seattle to get that final playoff spot, because if the Packers lose and Seattle wins, then Seattle gets in. But let's just say, for the sake of this argument, that Green Bay loses, Seattle loses, Minnesota beats the Lions, and the Saints lose to Atlanta. Do you know who gets the number 7 seed then?
You said, give me that scenario one more time.
So if the Packers lose, the Seahawks lose, the Saints lose to Atlanta.
Oh, then Minnesota will slide up.
Yeah, so there's so many different options for that number 7 seed at this point, just because there's a lot of teams.
But it would take a hell of a lot for Minnesota to get up in there.
It will, just because.
I'll put it this way: the chances of Minnesota getting to the playoffs is about the same chances as the Steelers getting in. Honestly,
I know that because the Lions can still get that number 2 seed, which is why I don't see Minnesota winning. But if the Lions were in a position where they couldn't move up or move down, I think Minnesota would have a much better chance to beat Detroit, because if the game was close, Dan Campbell would probably be like, whatever, we'll just give them this win because we'll probably see them next week anyways. So, like, you see that all the time, because remember a few years ago, more than a few years ago now, it was when Adrian Peterson came back from his torn ACL and ran for like those 2,085 yards or whatever.
Yeah.
Minnesota came into week 17 needing to beat Green Bay to make the playoffs. Green Bay already had their number 2 seed clinched. So Mike McCarthy started everybody the way they were, but it got to the second half where Minnesota kept hanging around, and Mike McCarthy then pulled Aaron Rodgers and basically said, we're going to see him next week in Lambeau. So at this point, what's the reason to leave our starters out there? We'll just take them out. We'll give Minnesota the win. We'll come into Lambeau, and then they got their ass kicked the following week.
You know what they say, man. Never take the foot off the gas pedal.
Yeah,
never take the foot off the gas pedal. And that's what Mike McCarthy did.
So looking at the NFC playoff picture, I think it's going to end up almost the same as what it is right now. I think, obviously San Francisco's got number 1. But after that, I think it goes Dallas, Detroit, Tampa, Philadelphia, the Rams, and I do think Seattle gets that number 7 seed over Green Bay, because I see Seattle beating Frisco, and I think Chicago pulls the upset in Green Bay.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same way I was leaning too. I know 1 through 6, whatever. You can mix and match, whatever. But I think the only spot that's up for grabs at this point is number 7 at Green Bay, like you said. I can see the Bears getting the upset in Green Bay. I think Green Bay takes it lightly. I don't think they take the Bears seriously. And I think Seattle could sneak up and take one from them. Although I got to be honest with you, not New Orleans. San Francisco is still a fairly deep team, at least even on the defensive side. So I don't know if it's going to be a slam dunk for Seattle. But I am going to roll with Seattle just because I know they're not resting anybody. And that 3-headed monster, Njigba, Lockett, and Metcalf is going to be good. The only thing I think that could be a hindrance to Seattle would be Walker, because I think wasn't Walker hurt at this point right now?
Yeah, I actually looked at the schedule wrong. Seattle's playing Arizona.
Seattle's playing Arizona?
And the Rams are playing San Francisco.
Oh, that's right. God.
So now I'm going to definitely say Seattle beats Arizona just because of that situation.
Yeah, I'm still rolling with Seattle regardless. For the same reasons I said earlier, I think they have a good 3-headed monster. But the only thing that kind of makes me nervous a little bit about Seattle is that run game, but I think they'll figure it out. But Arizona, you got to remember now, this is the team that beat, Dallas, and they beat Philadelphia. So they're not a slouch team. They're not a team that you could just take lightly. I think they can also play spoiler, just like the Bears could play spoiler.
Yep.
However, I am going to roll with Seattle on this one, and I think Seattle does get the 7th spot. I just feel like it's their time.
And last thing before we get out of here, since we have made our 14 predictions in terms of who is going to be in the playoffs and who will not be in the playoffs, who do you have coming out of the AFC at this point? And who do you have coming out of the NFC at this point?
Yeah, I think the AFC is the easier one for me to predict. I really do believe Baltimore is just that team this year. I feel like this is just their year for that particular conference. So I definitely have the Baltimore Ravens. And then it really comes down to who do I think is going to get it out of the NFC. And I think it really comes down to between the 3, right? I think it comes down between Dallas, Philadelphia, and San Francisco as to who wants it the most. I really think that San Francisco has a lot of weapons. They have a lot of depth. They've added to the defense in Chase Young. Like I told you last year, I think they had Brock Purdy last year. I don't think it's the Eagles in the Super Bowl. I think it's the San Francisco 49ers. And so because of that, and because if they can stay injury-free, then I absolutely 100% have it San Francisco versus Baltimore in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, for me, it's actually the opposite. I think the NFC is. I think San Francisco is just so much better than everybody else in the NFC that I really don't think anyone's going to stand a chance to beat them. And it's not because of the level of play. I just think I just think the teams are going to beat each other up so much before they get to San Francisco that San Francisco is just going to completely expose them. Like you look at that first game, San Francisco's got a first round bye. Well, then you have the Lions. If the Lions and the Packers play each other in that first round, those teams are going to knock the ever-living crap out of each other, where the winner of that game is going to have to go to San Francisco. Well, that's going to be almost a cakewalk at that point for San Francisco because those teams are going to be so battered and bruised from the week before, they'll run right through it. So you could say the same thing about possibly Dallas and Philadelphia. Dallas and Philadelphia hate each other. They've seen each other so much this year that if they face each other a third time, they're going to be so battered and bruised going up against Frisco in that NFC title game that it's not going to be as difficult as the AFC just because so many of those teams are going to have to knock each other out basically to get to Frisco versus the AFC. There's so many intriguing matchups in the AFC because all of these teams know each other so well. Buffalo and Miami play each other twice a year, could face each other a third time this year. Buffalo and Kansas City always seem to play in the playoffs every single year, so that'll be a matchup to look out for. You have Baltimore, who faces Kansas City quite often. That's going to be in there. You have the Jacksonville-Houston scenario where they faced each other twice during the year. They can see each other again. Cleveland and Baltimore, same situation. They see each other again. And you have Joe Flacco, the former Ravens quarterback. There's so many different scenarios there. But for me right now, I have San Francisco coming out of the NFC. And I don't know. I like Cleveland coming out of the AFC. I really do. You have that defense that's been a Super Bowl defense all season long, but now all of a sudden they bring in 39-year-old Joe Flacco, who is playing the best football he has played in 5 years, and he has no issues going on the road in the playoffs because the only time he's ever won the Super Bowl, did it as the number 5 seed and went right through the playoffs. He is, I believe, 11-4 or 11-5 on the road as a starting quarterback in the playoffs. So going on the road does not bother Joe Flacco. And I don't know. I like the way the Browns are playing, so I think it's going to end up being Cleveland and Frisco in the Super Bowl.
I'll tell you one thing. The one thing I am sure of with the AFC side of life is that Kansas City is a former shell of itself. They are not the same Kansas City team that we saw last year.
And I want to say that
they are not the same team. The offensive coordinator clearly made a difference. Not having a wide receiver, true wide receiver one, made a difference. Taylor Swift, for crying out loud, made a difference. It's just not the same team. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I want to say the same thing, but at the same time, I'm always hesitant to say that because it's still Patrick Mahomes, and we've seen him flip a switch quicker than any quarterback's ever flipped a switch.
True, but let me throw another piece of knowledge out there. No sports figure has ever won a championship with a celebrity as their side piece.
Oh, I get that, but the other thing
I'm just saying. I think Taylor Swift. Yeah. I don't believe in voodoo. I don't believe in magic. I don't believe in all that crazy stuff. But I do believe that Taylor Swift is going to be the downfall of the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, the other big thing with the Chiefs too is Patrick Mahomes has never had to play a playoff game on the road yet.
Yeah.
And there is, despite having the number 3 seed.
Hey, hold on. I got to step away real quick.
You what?
I got to step away just real quick. I got a important phone call.
Oh, we can just sign off right now. That's fine because I got to get my kids shortly anyways.
Okay. Hey, Tim, hold on just one sec. Okay. Hey, y'all be good. Peace out. I'll see y'all next week. McLovin out. Hey, Tim.
Yeah, before I sign off on today's episode, what I was going to say is the Kansas City Chiefs have yet to play a road game in Patrick Mahomes' entire playoff career. There's a chance, despite having the 3 seed, that could happen again this year. You look at the matchups. Kansas City gets that first game at home at Arrowhead. Should they get through that game, if Cleveland knocks off Jacksonville, and if Buffalo knocks off Miami or vice versa, Miami knocks off Buffalo, Kansas City gets a second home game, whether it be against Cleveland, whether it be against Miami, Kansas City would get that second home playoff game. And if somehow Baltimore were to lose to Cleveland or whatever, Kansas City could then get another home playoff game. So I'm not ready to count Kansas City out at this point until I know for sure if they have a road playoff game. But as things stand right now, Jay's got the Baltimore Ravens and the 49ers, I believe, in the Super Bowl. I have the Cleveland Browns and 49ers in the Super Bowl. One thing we know for sure is this is going to be a very, very exciting NFL playoffs that are set to begin in about a week's time. But until we dive into that a little bit more in the coming weeks, this has been Dustin Reese, a.k.a. Stat Guy with Jay McLovin. Thanks for hopping on for the special edition of Unscripted here on the ESEN Network.